Hello everyone and welcome to the chapter number 48 of Blender Master Course Geometry Nodes Part 1 of creating a sci-fi portal scene. In this chapter and the upcoming chapter, we'll be understanding lots of new geometry nodes and we'll also be creating this amazing portal scene in Blender. So in today's chapter, let's understand all these topics in complete detail, and for those of you who are new to this course, you can check out the previous 48 chapters from the link of the playlist in the pinned comment. Now first of all, let's go to the Geometry Nodes workspace, click on the new button here, and the first thing that I'm gonna do is to change this cube into a UV sphere. So go to the Geometry Nodes editor, press Shift plus A, go to Mesh, and in the primitives, select the UV sphere, place it over here, and connect the mesh socket to the group output. Now we'll be using this UV sphere to create a scene with some lighting emerging out of it, and for this we'll be using some curves placed as instances on the points of the UV sphere. So let's understand it practically. So first of all, let's add the instance on points node. So press Shift plus A, go to instances, and select the instance on points. Place it over here. Then for the instance object, we'll be using the curve line node. So press Shift plus A, go to curve, and in the primitives, select the curve line. Place it over here and connect it to the instance socket. Now these are the curve lines that are placed as instances on the different points of the UV sphere, and we'll be using them to create some lighting emerging out of the portal or the UV sphere, and it will be connecting to the area outside the portal. So for this, let's first add a set position node. So press Shift plus A, go to geometry, and in the right category, select the set position node. Place it over here. Now we want that only the endpoints of this curve line to be connected to the world outside this portal, and for this we'll be connecting this selection socket to a new node which is called the endpoint selection node. To add it over here, press Shift plus A, go to curve, then in the read category, select the endpoint selection. Place it over here and connect it to the selection socket in the set position node. Now here we have two options, the start size and the end size, and since we want to affect only the endpoints of the curve line, we'll keep the end size to 1, but we'll change the start size to 0. Now we'll go to the 3D viewport and let's add some random objects around the sci-fi portal. So press Shift plus A, go to mesh, and I'll select a UV sphere, move it in the Y axis like this, press Shift plus D to create a duplicate, place it over here. Let's create two more copies and place them around the portal. Now moving ahead, the next node that we're going to discover is the sample nearest node. To add it here, press Shift plus A, go to geometry, and in the sample, select the sample nearest node. Let's place it over here. Now this node is very similar to the geometry proximity node. It takes a geometry as an input, and in the output, it gives the nearest indices to the geometry. Now suppose you want to use these UV spheres added in the scene as the geometry input in the sample nearest node. So for this, I'll select all these 4 UV spheres and we'll join them together by pressing Ctrl plus J. Now they're converted into a single object with the name sphere in the scene collection. So I'll select the portal again. Let's drag the sphere into the geometry nodes editor, connect the geometry socket to the geometry in the sample nearest node, and now the sample nearest node will take these UV spheres as the input, or basically as the sample, and in the index output socket, it will give the nearest indices. Now to use this index socket somewhere, we'll be using the sample index node. So press Shift plus A, go to geometry, then in the sample, select the sample index node, place it over here. Then I'll take the geometry socket and connect it to the geometry in the sample index node. Now we'll be using the sample index node to calculate the position at that particular index. So first of all, change the data type to vector. Then for the value socket, we'll be using the position node. So press Shift plus A, go to geometry, and in the read category, select the position node. Let's place it over here and connect it to the value socket. Then I'll connect the index socket of the sample nearest to the index socket in the sample index node. Now I'll connect the output to the position socket in the set position node. Now let's also understand what all we did here again. First of all, we used this object info node which is carrying the information about these UV spheres. Then we connected it to the sample nearest node and the sample index node. This sample nearest node was calculating the index value of the points nearest to the geometry of the UV spheres, and we used this index value as the input in the sample index node in order to calculate the position of those indices. Then we connected it to the set position node in order to see the changes. However, to actually see the changes in the scene, we have to use the realize instances node. To add it here, press Shift plus A, go to instances, and select the realize instances node, place it in between the instance on points and the set position node, and now we notice some changes here. If I go to the object info node and turn on the relative from here, then this is how the endpoints of the curve line get connected to the spheres. Also, if I try to move the UV spheres, then you can see here that these curve lines were also changing. And now moving ahead, you can see that these curve lines are very straight, and to give them some randomness, we'll be using some texture. So first of all, I'll create a duplicate of this set position node by pressing Shift plus D. Let's place it over here. Then I'll add the noise texture node. So press Shift plus A, go to texture and select the noise texture. Place it over here. Now I'll take the factor socket and connect it to the offset in the set position node. Also turn off the normalize, and now the curve lines are having this random pattern. Now to increase the randomness even more, we need to increase the number of control points of the curve. Right now, since the curve line is completely straight, as a result there are only two control points, one at the beginning, another at the end. And to increase the number of control points, we'll be using the resample curve node. To add it here, press Shift plus A, go to curve, and in the operations, select the resample curve node. Place it in between the two set position nodes, and now with the help of the count value, you can control the number of these control points. So we'll keep it to something like 8 or 10. Let's also reduce the scaling. So we'll keep the scaling to something like 1 or 1.5. And then to reduce their number, I'll go to the UV sphere node, change the number of segments to something like 6. Let's also change the number of rings to something like 5 or 6, or maybe I'll keep both of the values to 8, and this is how it looks now. And yes, if I select these curve lines, press G to move it, that it creates a very interesting thunder lighting type of pattern which we needed for the sci-fi portal. But to give it some thickness, we'll be using the curve to mesh node. So press Shift plus A, go to curve, and in the operations, select the curve to mesh node. Place it over here. Then as usual, we'll connect the profile curve to the curve circle node. So press Shift plus A, go to curve, and in the primitives, select the curve circle node. We'll connect it to the profile curve socket. Let's reduce the radius to something like 0.1. Then suppose we want that the radius should be bigger at one end and smaller at the other end. Then for this we have the spline parameter node. To use it, we first need to add the set curve radius node. So press Shift plus A, go to curve, and in the right category, select the set curve radius. Place it over here, and to add the spline parameter, press Shift plus A, go to curve, and in the read category, select the spline parameter node. Place it over here, connect the factor socket to the radius, and to control the effect, let's add the map range node. So press Shift plus A, go to utilities, and in the math, select the map range node. Place it over here. Now to have the bigger radius on this end and the smaller radius at the opposite end, simply go to the map range node, change the 2 min to a value of 1 and the 2 max to a value of 0. Now let's also reduce the number of these curve lines again. So go to the UV sphere node, let's change the number of segments and the rings to something like 5. Then to view the UV sphere along with these curve lines at the center, let's add a join geometry node. So press Shift plus A, go to geometry, and select the join geometry node. Place it over here, and to add the UV sphere, if I try to connect the original UV sphere to the join geometry node, then the reason why it looks like this is that we have reduced the number of segments and the rings here. So for now, I'll first undo and add a new UV sphere node. So press Shift plus A, go to mesh, and in the primitives, select the UV sphere. Let's place it over here and connect the mesh socket to the join geometry node. Also, you can see here that some of these curves are emerging out of this UV sphere. So to fix this, select the original UV sphere node, reduce the radius to something like 0.5 or 0.4, and this is how it looks now. If I press G to move it, then you can see that it's creating this interesting pattern. Let's also do one more thing. I'll select these UV spheres, tab into the edit mode, and we'll be placing them properly because right now they are not properly placed in the X, Y, and Z axis. So first of all, I'll go to the top view by pressing 0 on the numpad. Then to select a particular UV sphere, first I'll deselect all of them. Then with my mouse over one of the UV spheres, if I press L, then that particular UV sphere will get connected. Press G to move it and place it over here. Similarly, I'll deselect everything again by left clicking anywhere else in the 3D viewport. Take the mouse cursor to another UV sphere, press L to select it, press G, X, and move it over here. Let's also move it in the Y axis like this. Let's do the same with the third one. Press G and move it over here. Now I'll select the fourth one by first deselecting, then press L and move it slightly close to this UV sphere. Now this is how our scene is looking. Let's select this one also, press G, Y, and let's move it over here. And now the scene looks perfect. Now let's come out of the edit mode, and if you want, you can even create an animation of it where the central UV sphere will be rotating like this. So to create this animation, press N to open the toolbar, and in the item category, right now the rotation in all the 3 axes is set to 0. So let's insert a keyframe for these rotation values at the frame number 1. Then I'll take this pointer to the frame number 120, change the rotation in all the 3 axes to something like 1800 degrees, press I to insert a keyframe, and now if I take the pointer to the frame number 1 and play the animation, then this is how the animation looks with the rotating UV sphere. Now the next topic for today's chapter is understanding the edge angle node. So for this, first I'll add a plane in the scene. So press Shift plus A, go to mesh and select a plane, press G, X, and move it over here. Tab into the edit mode, press 2 for the edge select mode, select this edge. Now let's go to the front view by pressing 1 on the numpad. Now with that edge selected, press E to extrude it like this, and now we have a plane in the scene with one of the edges extruded like this. Now I'll go to the geometry nodes editor, click on the new button, and to add the edge angle node, press Shift plus A, go to mesh, and in the read category, select the edge angle node. Let's place it over here. Now this edge angle node will simply calculate the angle in between any two faces separated by an edge. Now since it will give the output in the form of angle, so we'll also need some input sockets to accept these values. So let's add the extrude extrude mesh node by pressing Shift plus A. Then in the mesh, go to operations and select the extrude mesh node. Let's place it over here, and now both the faces of the plane are extruded. Now let's go to the front view by pressing 1 on the numpad, or maybe Ctrl plus 1. And now if I take the unsigned angle socket and connect it to the offset scaling in the extrude mesh node, then now the offset scaling will be controlled on the basis of the angle that we are receiving from this node. So if I tab into the edit mode, and with this edge selected over here, if I try to change the angle by pressing G, then you will notice that the amount of offset scaling, or basically the extrusion, is also changing. If I bring both the planes in the same line, then the offset scaling will reduce to 0. However, if I change the angle like this, then this unsigned angle socket will consider the shortest angle in between both the faces, and in this way we will control the offset scale value also. But if I take the signed angle socket and connect it to the offset scale, then this one also will calculate the angle in between both the faces, and if that angle is less than 180 degrees, then the value will be negative, and as a result, the extrusion gets applied to the opposite side. And if I press G to move the edge and place it over here, then you can see that this angle over here is less than 180 degrees, and as a result, the extrusion is being applied to the opposite side. However, if I take the unsigned angle socket and connect it again to the offset scale, then in this case, the extrusion will get applied on this side only. So with the unsigned angle, it will simply take the shortest angle between the two faces and will apply the extrusion accordingly. However, if I take the signed angle socket, then in this case, it will check whether the angle is less than or equal to 180 degrees, and if the condition is true, then the extrusion will get applied to the opposite side, and this is how the edge angle node works. Now we'll be using this plane in order to make a portal around these UV spheres, and for this, I'll go back to the front view by pressing Ctrl plus 1 on the numpad, then take the unsigned angle in the edge angle node and connect it to the offset scale. After that, press G to move the edge and place it over here. Now press A to select everything, then press G, X and move it over here in such a way that this yellow origin point just touches this edge over here. Then to create the portal, select this edge, then go back to the front view again. Now press G to move it like this, and to make the first half of the portal, we'll be extruding this edge, so hold on Ctrl, and if I right click anywhere, then the edge will get extruded like this. Let's do it one more time. Hold on Ctrl and right click over here. Now this is how the first half of the portal is looking right now. Let's also come out of the edit mode, and to add the faces on this inner side of the portal also, we'll be using the join geometry node. So press Shift plus A, go to geometry and select the join geometry node, place it over here and connect the group input to the join geometry. Now we also need to extrude this back part of the portal, and for this we'll be adding an extrude mesh node at the end. So I'll select this one, press Shift plus D to create a duplicate and place it after the join geometry node. Now because of applying the extrusion, the inside faces here have again disappeared, and to fix this, we'll again be adding a join geometry node over here. So I'll select this one, press Shift plus D to create a duplicate and place it over here. Take this geometry socket and connect it to the join geometry node. Now one part of the portal is completely ready, and to make the other part, I'll be adding another join geometry node. So I'll select this one, create a duplicate, place it over here. Then for the duplicate part, we'll be adding a transform geometry node. So press Shift plus A, go to geometry and in the operations, select the transform geometry node, place it over here. Now we'll connect the geometry socket in the join geometry node to this geometry socket in the transform geometry. Then for the output, I'll connect this socket to this join geometry node. And now let's understand what exactly we did here. See, the original join geometry node was carrying the information about this part of the fence. However, if you notice here closely, we have connected it to this join geometry node 2 times. First we connected it directly, and second time we connected it using the transform geometry node. And this transform geometry node will basically be controlling the duplicate that we created. So if I go to the scaling value in the x-axis and try to change it, then you will notice that at a value of -1, the portal looks completely perfect. Also, let's move it in the x-axis like this. Let's keep it to something like 1 meters or 1.5 meters. Now we'll be placing this portal in place of these UV spheres surrounding the main UV sphere. So I'll select this, press X to delete, and to place this portal, press 7 to go to the top view. Let's move it in the x-axis and place it over here. Let's go to the front view also and move it upwards in the z-axis. Now to get the effect of these curved lines according to this portal, I'll select the UV sphere. Then in the object info node that we added here, I'll change the object from sphere to plane. Now to ensure that this effect is visible all over the portal, I'll select it and move it down like this, and then left click to finalize. Now let's also give some material to the objects in the scene. So I'll go to the render view, then to improve the lighting, I'll select the lamp, go to the object data properties, change the type of light to sun, reduce the strength to something like 5 or 4. Let's move it in the y-axis like this. Now rotate the light by pressing R and rotate it like this. Let's create a duplicate of this light. So press Shift plus D, move it in the y-axis and place it over here. Then press R to rotate it and keep the rotation like this. So first I'll select the center object, then go to the material properties. Now this default material is added here. So let's add a set material node in the geometry nodes editor with this default material. So press Shift plus A, go to material and select the set material node, place it over here, and in the list of materials we'll be selecting this material. Now let's go to the shader editor from here, and here we have the default principle BSDF applied. Now to give it some texture, we'll be using the Musgrave texture. So press Shift plus A, go to texture and select the noise texture, place it over here, and as I already told you in the previous chapters, Blender has merged the Musgrave texture with this noise texture, and to get the same effect as the Musgrave texture here, we simply need to turn off the normalize option here. Now press Ctrl plus T to get the texture coordinate and the mapping node, take the object socket and connect it to the vector, and to view the output, I'll take the factor socket and connect it to the base color. Now in the noise texture, first of all, I'll reduce the scaling to something like 1 or 2, then I'll increase the detailing to a value of 15. Let's also increase the roughness, and I'll keep it to something like 0.7 or 0.8. Let's also increase the distortion to a value of something like 0.8 or maybe 1. Now for the colors, let's add a color ramp. So press Shift plus A, go to converter and select the color ramp, place it over here. Now I'll select the second pointer and change the color from white to red. Then I'll take the factor socket and connect it to the alpha in the principal BSDF. The reason for doing this is that I wanted to make the black part slightly transparent. Also, let's go to the render properties and I'll change the render engine to cycles. Then open the material properties again, scroll down, and in the viewport display settings, do ensure that the blend mode is selected to alpha hash or alpha blend. For now, I'll be selecting the alpha blend. Now let's also work on the emission. So for the emission color, we'll be keeping the same color that we get from the color ramp. So I'll take this color socket and connect it to the emission color. Then I'll increase the strength to something like 10. And to see the effect properly, we also need to turn on the bloom setting. So for this, go to the composting workspace, click on the use nodes, and to add the bloom effect, press Shift plus A, go to filter and select the glare node, place it over here, change the glare type to bloom and set the quality to high. Then I'll keep the size to something like 6, and now I'll go to the geometry nodes editor again, and to view the effects here, click on this icon and set the compositor to always, and now the bloom effect is properly applied. The reason why this portal is also glowing is that the strength of the light in the scene is very high. So I'll go to the object data properties and reduce the strength to something like 1. Let's do the same with the other light also. I'll reduce the strength to a value of 1, and now this is how this material is looking right now. If you want, you can reduce the emission strength to something like 5 or 6, but I think that right now 10 looks perfect, so I'll finalize it. And if you want, you can even go to the render properties and change the render engine back to Eevee, and now this is how the scene looks. You can also try to change the scale value here to something else, or maybe the roughness, and you can create a different type of material for this object at the center. Also, let's add a plane below this. So press Shift plus A, go to mesh and select the plane, tab into the edit mode, press A to select everything and scale it up 20 times. Let's come out of the edit mode, press G, Z and move it down like this. Now one thing that you can notice here after adding the plane is that in the material that we created, here we are having some transparent parts in the middle, and that is because we connected the factor socket to the alpha. If I remove it from here, then previously it was completely black colored. However, by connecting the factor socket to the alpha, this black color changed to transparent, and as a result, you can easily see through it. Now moving ahead, let's also modify this plane. So I'll go to the solid mode, then click here and open the geometry nodes editor. Click on the new button, and to control the size and the number of vertices of the plane, let's add a grid node in the geometry nodes editor. So press Shift plus A, go to mesh, and in the primitives, select the grid, place it over here and connect it to the group output. Let's increase the size to something like 20, or maybe let's keep it to 50, and the number of vertices to something like 100. And now let's add the split edges node. So press Shift plus A, go to mesh, and in the operations, select the split edges node, place it over here, and to view its effect, let's also add the scale elements node. So press Shift plus A, go to mesh, and in the operations, select the scale elements node, place it after the split edges node and reduce the scale to something like 0.9. And now you can see here that because of the split edges node, we are now having these separate faces scaled down due to the scale elements node. Now moving ahead, the next topic for today's chapter is understanding the face group boundaries node. To add it here, press Shift plus A, go to mesh, and in the read category, select the face group boundaries node. Let's place it over here. Now this node simply finds the edges or the boundaries lying in a specific region. To understand it in a better way, I'll take this boundary edges socket and connect it to the selection in the split edges node, and now it will split the edges according to the face group ID that we input here. Now suppose you want some random edges, so for the face group ID socket, let's use the noise texture node along with the compare node. So press Shift plus A, go to texture and select the noise texture, place it over here, turn off the normalize. Then to add the compare node, press Shift plus A, go to utilities, and in the math category, select the compare node. Let's place it over here, connect the factor socket to the value A and the result to the face group ID. Now let's reduce the scale value to something like 0.1, and now let's understand what all we did here. Hold down Ctrl Shift shift and left click on the noise texture. Similarly, with the Control and Shift key holded, left click on the grid node also, and in this way we are able to see this plane that we added along with the noise texture. You can see that because of adding this texture, we are having this black and white area, and at the region where this black and white part mixes together, or basically where we have this gray area, this is the boundary which we used in the face group boundaries node. If I delete the viewer node from here, then you can see that now only those edges have disappeared which were present at the boundary in the noise texture. To understand this concept in a better way, let's remove the split edges and the scale elements node, then press Shift plus A, go to mesh, and in the operations, let's add the extrude mesh node. Place it over here, connect the mesh socket of the grid node to the extrude mesh, and then connect the extrude mesh node to the group output. Now I'll connect the face group boundaries node to the selection. Let's also increase the scaling of the texture to something like 0.5, then go to the extrude mesh and increase the offset scaling. Then only these edges are getting extruded that were present at the boundary in the noise texture. And so this is the use of the face group boundaries node. Also, to view the effect in a much better way, I'll change the mode to edges and reduce the offset scaling like this, and now it's very clearly visible that the extrusion is being applied to only those edges where we are having this boundary in the noise texture. So for now, I'll delete this viewer node. Let's increase the offset scaling to something like 2 or maybe 1.8. Let's also reduce the scaling in the noise texture to something like 0.06, and this is how our scene looks now. Now moving ahead, let's also give some material to this plane. So go to the material properties, click on the new button, and to set this material, go to the geometry nodes editor, press Shift plus A, go to material and select the set material node. Place it over here. Now I'll select the material.001. Let's go to the render view, and to modify the material, let's go to the shader editor from here. Now in the shader editor, press Shift plus A, go to texture and add the noise texture. Let's place it over here. Press Ctrl plus T to connect it to the texture coordinate and the mapping node. Now just like always, take the object socket and connect it to the vector, and to view the results, take the factor socket of the noise texture and connect it to the base color. Also, turn off the normalize from here, and we'll be keeping the texture to exactly the same scaling as we did in the geometry nodes. So let's open the geometry nodes editor from here, and in the noise texture that we added here, we set the scale to a value of 0.06. So in the shader editor also, I'll change the scaling to a value of 0.06, and this is how it looks now. Also, if you want, you can set the detailing to something like 15. Let's also change the roughness, and we'll keep it to something like 0.6 or 0.7, and now it looks perfect. To give some color to it, let's add a color ramp. So press Shift plus A, go to converter and select the color ramp, place it over here. Now I'll select this white pointer and we'll keep it to something like green color, and if you want, you can even assign this color to the emission color here. So I'll take the socket and connect it to the color in the emission section. Let's also increase the emission strength to something like 5 or 10. Then to make this black area slightly transparent, I'll take this factor socket in the noise texture and connect it to the alpha in the principal BSDF. Now do ensure that all the parameters that you have set here in the noise texture are exactly same as the noise texture in the geometry nodes editor. In this one, we have set the detailing to 15 and the roughness to 0.642. So let's go to the geometry nodes editor again, and in the noise texture, I'll change the detailing to 15 and roughness to a value of 0.642. Now moving ahead, let's also give some material to the edges that we extruded here. So for this, let's create a duplicate of the set material node. So press Shift plus D and place it over here. Then I'll take this side socket of the extrude mesh node and connect it to the selection. This side socket is carrying the information about the extruded edges on the plane. Now let's create a new material by clicking on the plus icon and then clicking on the new material button, and to assign this material to the extruded edges, click here and select the material.002. Now to modify this material, go to the shader editor from here. Let's delete both of these nodes by pressing X, and for the texture, I will bring in the same nodes that we used in this material.001. So press A to select everything, Ctrl plus C to copy all the nodes, then I'll go to the material.002 and press Ctrl plus V to paste them. Now in the color ramp, I'll select the second pointer and change the color to something like blue, and this is how it looks now. Also, let's increase the scaling in the noise texture something like 0.15. Let's do the same with the material.001 also. Go to the noise texture, change the scaling to 0.15. Let's also do the same in the geometry nodes editor. So I'll go to the scaling in the noise texture again and increase it to 0.15. And with this, the material for the base, or basically the plane, is now completely ready. And with this, we now arrive to the end of the chapter number 48. In today's chapter, we learnt about the understanding of lots of new geometry nodes, and we used them to create this portal scene with this object and the portal. Then we even created a base where we used the face group boundaries node in order to extrude only the edges at the boundaries. Then we applied this beautiful looking material to it. And in the next chapter, we'll be learning about some new geometry nodes, and we'll also be continuing with this sci-fi portal scene. So our next chapter will be the chapter number 49, part 2 of creating a sci-fi portal scene. So don't forget to subscribe to our channel, press that notification bell so that you can get timely updates about the upcoming chapters. Thank you for watching, and we'll will see you in the next one.